All right. It's 2:01, so in the interest of time, we're going to get started. We may have a couple more joining us, but hello. Nice to see you all. I think I know all of you that are here. So for study abroad exchanges at UNCG, and I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit today about risk management in the age of COVID-19. So I know that a lot of you are preparing to submit your program renewals and to prepare to take students abroad in kind of an uncertain world right now. So hopefully this presentation will help you a little bit think through some of the additional considerations and guidance that IPC can provide for taking students abroad next summer, hopefully. We're feeling optimistic about it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Wonderful. Well, as I said, this is Risk Management Reimagined. And then just again to start with some Zoom housekeeping, there will be a dedicated time at the end for open discussion. But if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to type those into the chat as they come up. Everyone will be on mute, but we can unmute and you can unmute yourselves to speak and engage in discussion at designated times. And then this session is being recorded and will be posted to the UNCG faculty-led program directors Canvas page next week. So we will have this recorded and you can share it either with your colleagues or refer to it later for your own reference. All right, so who had global pandemic on their risk management bingo card for this year? So that is one thing that I think is, I wanted to start off with a little bit of humor, even though I know that this has been a few hard months, but really what we're trying to do is figure out with the risk management how to effectively approach thinking about risk so that we can create safe and risk mitigated environments for our students. So first off, just want to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, we have principles of effective risk management. This goes not only for COVID, but for any risk management that you'll be doing, hopefully in years where COVID is not as much of an issue. And then we'll talk about a framework that you can use to address risk that I found helpful in my approach to risk management. Some conditions that would support student travel and some additional considerations that are related to COVID-19. We'll talk a little bit about insurance, general risk assessment tips, again, applicable to any year, and then we'll have our open discussion. And as I said, as we go through, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I will try to answer them as we go along. All right, so first off, principles of effective risk management. So when we're thinking about risk, there is no way to eliminate every single risk of every single activity in the world. No activity is without some risk. I was doing some research and actually about 450 people a year die from falling out of bed. So even sleeping in and of itself is not a risk-free activity. And 24 folks actually were killed by champagne corks. So even the things that you don't think would come up as risk, there are risks to any activity. Our goal as risk mitigators is to anticipate and plan for risks so that when risk arises, when a crisis or emergency happens, that we have a little bit of preparation, we have a plan of how to approach it. So risk appetite, which is defined as how much risk either an individual or an institution is willing to take on, varies widely between those individuals and across institutions. So you'll find as we move into this program, I know you've already seen the UNC system, some folks have already started postponing programs for spring and are looking at summer. Some folks are like, yeah, we're going to go ahead with spring and send students abroad. So that appetite is going to be very different depending on what institution you are with, and then also individually how much risk you're willing to assume and your students are willing to assume when taking your programs abroad. So what can we do to help manage risk? We can put in place good policies, practices, and procedures that can help address the most likely of risks, and then also put plans in place for risks that maybe are a little less likely, but might be a little more high impact. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So continuing evaluation of risk response is key to improving future risk management. So it's not just about putting these plans in place, it's about when we have to use the plans, evaluating them and then shifting them, editing them so that we can better respond to risk in the future. So that's a real key component of risk management. So I have found this tool really helpful. It's a risk management matrix. I ran into it during I believe it was a North Carolina Association for International Educators conference, and it's a really helpful way to think about risk. So as you can see on the screen, there is on the y-axis is likelihood of a risk happening, and then on the x-axis is severity of risk. So when we're thinking about this, what we want to do is think about risk as kind of what's the likelihood and what's the severity of the impact should that risk come to fruition. So in the lower left-hand corner, we see the low likelihood, low severity. This is what we consider to be acceptable risk, as we say. So this would be like getting a paper cut. I mean, it probably won't happen, but if it does happen, it won't be very severe at all. You put a Band-Aid on it, move on with your life. High likelihood, high severity risk is what we like to say is unacceptable risk, and that's in that upper right-hand quadrant, which is very likely to happen and very severe with the impact. So this would be, for example, going to a war zone. Maybe don't do that because you know that there is a high likelihood of dangerous activity and the impact is likely to be highly severe. So what we deal with most often when we're talking about risk management are what they call the messy maybes, and those are the two yellow areas. So events that are highly likely to happen but low severity, events that are not very likely to happen but could have high severity. So for examples of what we want to think of with high likelihood, low severity would be, for example, a student losing their luggage. That's something that happens every year whenever we send students abroad, but the impact likely is not going to be very severe unless there's some other extenuating circumstance. So that would be something that we would want to plan for and to expect might happen, but the impacts are not likely to be super impactful, as it were. And then in the lower right-hand quadrant, that's where it gets a little bit messy because you want to make sure that you're approaching risk with a realistic assessment of risk. But one great example, of course, of low likelihood, high severity impacts would be if there were to be a terror attack in your location. It's not very likely that it would happen, but if it were to happen, the impact could be very severe. So those are those crisis management planning areas that we look at in our policies and procedures. So that's really what we're looking at when we're approaching risk from this particular lens. And this just helps me think about risk, hopefully will help you as well. So along with that, it's good to understand the different types of emergencies that can arise while you're on your program. So first off, are what we call routine emergencies, not because we want to make them a part of our routine, but because they are the emergencies, the situations that are most likely to crop up when you're traveling abroad. So this is that kind of upper left-hand quadrant, which is the high likelihood, low severity. So minor sickness or injury, someone gets a cold, sprains their ankle, gets an infected blister, something like that, loses their passport. Again, we hope that that would be a little bit lower in the likelihood, but at least once a summer, somebody misplaces that important document. So those types of things, minor theft, a family emergency back home, grandma gets sick, or for example, a power failure. Like those are things that are pretty, are not unlikely to happen, but you want to have a plan for how to deal with them if they come up, because they do tend to come up more often than some of our other types of emergencies. And then we have our major emergencies. So those are like natural disasters, hurricane, earthquake, fire, major sickness or injury requiring hospitalization, assault, missing person, arrest, a hostage situation, some sort of socio-political unrest. So these are the big things that we plan for when we're putting together like our crisis management handbooks. So we have a lot of information on that in the faculty-led program director handbook, which is available on the Canvas site. I believe it's section 11 of the program director handbook that goes through a lot of these major emergencies and gives you an approach of how to deal with those. So we've definitely thought through those things. Again, those are kind of on the lower right-hand quadrant, low likelihood to happen, but if they were to happen, the impact would be severe, so we like to plan for those kinds of events. And then there is another type of emergency that I think is probably the most important one to spend some time on, and that is a perceived emergency. So this is something that people may think is a huge threat, like, for example, shark attacks. Like, yes, there are sharks. Yes, they can bite you. Yes, there have been shark attacks, but vending machines kill more people than sharks annually. So kind of thinking about what is the actual emergency, what are the facts, and what is the perception. Another example of this is when I was studying abroad myself in Belgium, there was a pretty big train derailment about 10 miles away from where I was. My mom was trying to get in touch with me. And meanwhile, I was sitting in class. I had no idea anything had happened. So with that, these perceived emergencies can be exacerbated by media and incomplete information. So thinking about how you'll approach those, and then, of course, helping students to understand what may or may not be a true emergency. So that kind of is something that, again, falls into that messy maybe category, and I always like to mention it. So what we're here to talk about, what we're all here to learn more about, is the COVID-19's impact on risk management planning for summer 2021 programs. So these are some guidelines that IPC has come up with. These are not official policy. These have not been vetted by the provost, but these are kind of the key indicators that we're looking at to figure out which conditions will be conducive to student-related travel as it pertains to COVID-19 going forward. So first off, we all know about community spread by now, and we're really looking for a lack of sustained increase. So either for the weekly new cases to go down or to stay steady, according to the World Health Organization reporting. Centers for Disease Control is another really good resource for these kinds of information and these kind of metrics. So lack of sustained in weekly new cases, lack of widespread community transmission, and that's counted as the number of folks that test positive within, I think it's 100,000 population. So making sure that there isn't widespread community transmission like there is in the United States right now. According to the World Health Organization, affirmation from any host institutions or partners. So if you're working with any type of third-party provider, with local partners, making sure that they are able to accept and support our students. Lack of a stay-at-home order in the program or host institution or city, because that would definitely put a damper on some of your program activities if there were a stay-at-home order. And then that your host country allows UNCG students to travel into their territory. So making sure that those immigration approaches are in support so that they can get in. And then the Department of State lowering travel advisories at least to level 3 or preferably below. The US Department of State had issued a worldwide travel advisory back in March, setting the entire globe at a level 4. They've since rescinded that as of about mid-August. And so they've gone back to having a country by country travel advisory warning. And so you'll want to be checking in with those specific countries that you're traveling to see what the situation on the ground is there. Preferably a 2 would be the best case scenario, or 3, but we can keep talking about that as it develops. And then finally, I mentioned Centered for Disease Control, making sure that they have not further increased the advisory level or banned travel to a host country. Again, what we're looking for is a level 2 or below. And level 2 is practice increased precautions. Level 1 is practice regular precautions. Level 3 is avoid non-essential travel. So with study abroad, level 3 would not be supportive of student travel to that particular region. So then we have some additional considerations that I wanted to bring up, and these are more guiding principles, guiding questions to think about as you approach summer 2021 and COVID considerations. So, for example, looking at the CDC and Department of State travel advisory levels, seeing whether or not there's widespread community spread, and making sure that those levels are at an appropriate level, I guess. How many times can I say that word? Immigration regulations. So again, this is something that's going to be important. So immigration regulations kind of goes beyond just, are the borders open? Can you get into and out of the country if you are not a resident or a citizen of that country? It goes into, can students get their travel documents on time? I know I was looking at a chart just today where they were laying out how many passport applications they had versus how many passport applications they had processed. And it's upwards of 100,000 passport applications that are currently awaiting processing through the Department of State. And of course, they are still operating at a little bit of reduced capacity. So that process is definitely taking longer than the standard 6 to 8 weeks. So thinking about things like that, thinking about whether or not your students need visas, and if they do need visas, are the embassies open? Can they get in to have an appointment? Are they issuing visas? Those types of things. UNCG and UNC system decisions. So again, we'll try and be as transparent as we can in our decision making as that moves forward, but you'll want to make sure that UNCG and the UNC system have made decisions that support student travel abroad in the term in which you're traveling. So we have additional health and safety considerations. Oops, went a little bit too fast there. So with that, you're going to want to think through not only like, are students in a place that doesn't have a widespread transmission of COVID? That's going to be, can students get routine medical care? If someone has a cold, can they go into the hospital or the doctor and get service? Is that service available and is it responsive? Are there other diseases that are going around? Thinking about that. Does local health infrastructure support routine and emergency medical? Are students required to quarantine upon arrival, which kind of relates back to that immigration regulation? If you're doing a 2 or 3 week program and there's a 2 or 3 week or 2 week quarantine period coming into the country, you might want to rethink the structure of the program or the feasibility of the program, because you just want to make sure that you're taking those types of things into consideration as well. Financial considerations. So I think one of the biggest areas of risk in moving forward with summer 2021 might just be the financials. Again, these putting down money and having students pay and paying out to providers or reserving hotel rooms, those are all risks because if the program ultimately doesn't run, you could lose finances, students could lose funding. So those are things you're going to want to think through. So kind of looking at your overall program budget, making sure that it looks like a healthy, supportive budget as always, but then also thinking about, are students going to be asked to pursue additional vaccinations? Are they going to be asked to quarantine? And if they are, is that something that the student is responsible for paying for or that the program can support? If a student gets sick on your program, where will they quarantine? How will they quarantine? Who pays for that? That sort of thing. So thinking through more and more what that would look like. And also, we'll talk a little bit more about go, no-go dates later, but also thinking about how your payment timeline for any payments that you have to make prior to your program, think how they line up with your recruitment time frame and then with the available of funds, either through your department or from student collected funds. And this was a good point that came up when I was talking with a couple of faculty who work in more remote locations. So thinking about if you are working in a more remote location, what might be the ethical implications of going to a place that may have limited or almost non-existent community spread from a country that has very widespread community spread, and just kind of thinking through that. Additionally, if you are going to a more remote location, how would students be able to access healthcare? Do you have a plan for that? On-site accommodations. So I know that definitely accommodations can be one of the, again, kind of a financial consideration as well, but thinking about social distancing. Do you have the space and capacity for students to be socially distanced? Kind of comparable to what would be on UNCG's campus. Looking at that, is there a place where students will be able to quarantine if they need to? Is that something the program keeps on retainer, or is that something that the student would be responsible themselves for? So these are really good things to think about. Additionally, are restaurants open? Can you get food from the grocery store? Will you be able to find enough housing for all of your students, given that they'll be in smaller groups within the accommodations? Activity availability. So if you're going to a program, are the museums open? Are you able to access the sites that you need to make your program enriching and fulfilling for students? So those are all just kind of some of the things that I've been thinking about, and this is also very heavily based on an article that is, again, posted in the Canvas page, and that is going to be, I think it's called Beyond Summer 2019 or Summer 2020, and it's thinking through all of the different implications of COVID-19, not just for like student health related to COVID-19, but all of these other bigger factors that are becoming kind of more clear as we move through this pandemic together. And then one additional really important thing to note, and I know I've gotten some questions about this, if a program is canceled, students will be refunded the $350 IPC administrative fee plus any recoverable costs. And those recoverable costs, again, are dependent on your program. And this is why the go, no-go dates that I mentioned are going to be extremely important, because if you cancel the program before the go, no-go date, then you may not have any non-recoverable costs. But the closer you get to your program's implementation, the more those costs are going to start to rack up. And that'll depend on your partnerships with your vendors that you're working with and other considerations as to when that go, no-go date will be for you. All right, so I am going to pause a moment here just to check the chat. All right. I'm going to try to check the chat. There we go. All right, let's see. Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to know. And since we don't have any questions as yet that have been put into the chat, I'm going to, oh, Carmen, yes.
I can go ahead and tell you directly rather than through the chat. So Heidi, hello everyone. If I understood correctly, if a country it's being designated a level 3 or 4, the program would not be permitted to go ahead, correct? Okay, so for a program to go, it has to be a level 2 or below.
Yes, level 2, or if it is a level 3, we can talk about that. But it depends on some other factors as to whether or not level 3s are acceptable. But level 2 would definitely be. And I know level 1, there were only like a few countries even before the pandemic that hit that level. So 2 is really what you're aiming for.
Okay. Sorry to jump in, but yeah, just I guess I was just going to say with that the State Department level warning, it's something to keep an eye on consistently because it fluctuates a lot. And if you are at the point where you're ready to commit students or there's a financial commitment, yeah, like Heidi said, I think if it's still at a level 3, bring it up to Heidi before you go canceling programs or telling students, oh, it turned to a 3, so it's over. It's a little bit more nuanced now, but go ahead.
Yeah, and how time-wise, because you know the country that I am planning to take the students to, it's now at least a level 3, possibly even a level 4 right now. So how we'll have to be watching events, see how things happen, and when would be a good time to determine whether the program goes or not. What do you think? I'm thinking more of the spring semester.
Right. Yes. So if your program is currently at a level 3 or 4, I would say you can still go ahead and plan and to submit your renewal and all of that. If you're looking at kind of setting what we call the go, no-go date, that is going to depend on when your first payments are going to be due to the partner you're working with or to reserve tickets or book your flights, things like that. Usually in terms of time frame, that happens right around mid to late February, all the way up to mid to late March, depending on your program. There are some programs that don't require payment until you arrive at a location, so they would have a lot more flexibility from that end as to when they would be able to cancel the program. But also you want to think about, are students purchasing flights? Have they gotten their passports, visas, things like that, and kind of taking all those different things into consideration. And that's why we don't have kind of a single go, no go date for any program, because they're all just so unique. So we can definitely talk more one-on-one on what would be a good date for your program. Usually it's after that first big payment and before you have to start making payments. Did that answer your question, Carmen?
Heidi, this is Twisha. Can I just
Hi, Twisha.
quick
Yeah.
second? So I just wanted to follow up for Carmen. One of the considerations we do for go, no go is, can students register for something else?
That's a good one too.
If they are graduating that semester and you cancel it too late, then they are short those credits and cannot graduate.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Twisha. Yeah, so definitely making sure that students can arrange for alternate plans. And then also thinking, if you are running a summer course with financial aid, thinking about the implications of that, because a lot of our students do use aid to help defer some of those costs and to pay them through their financial aid packages. So you want to make sure that you're telling students in enough time, again, if they are taking credits over the summer, they can switch their academic plans from study abroad to a domestic course, so that they don't have to incur any like financial penalties or have to repay aid or anything as well. Thank you. That was a great point, Twisha. Any other questions before we move on to talking about insurance? All right. Thank you for those, and we will continue to move on. So insurance. So as you all know, students and, sorry, we have one more question. Yes, Hope. Hi.
I was trying to wave my hand.
Yeah, I can only see like 4 people at a time.
Yeah, I know. Looking at the UNCG and UNC decisions,
yes,
I don't even know what they're saying right now. They probably don't want people traveling abroad at the moment. I know you canceled for fall. Are there certain dates by which they will announce those decisions?
Not certain dates that they've shared with us. I wish I had more information for you, but I know for spring, I think most folks are trying to make a decision within the next couple of months. And it's a question of whether or not it will be at the system level, which it doesn't seem to be at this point that would be a route that they would take, because the 17 different campuses are so different. And again, going back to that risk appetite of what they're able and willing to assume as far as risk goes. But hopefully we would know for spring, again, in the next couple of months. For summer, I don't know if there is a projected timeline yet. Tom, do you have any more information on that? Okay, I'm seeing a no.
Yeah, no, I think, if we look at kind of what we're looking at for when we look to spring 2021, we're looking around mid-October as far as hopefully a date to let students know whether things are happening. Again, that's dependent on programs too. So if you transpose that into next term, that would to me seem like mid-semester maybe would be a date, but it's hard to project.
Yeah, as soon as we know, you will know. So I can definitely say that. Yeah, I know this whole situation is making me wish for a crystal ball. So it's on my Amazon wish list for Christmas. We'll see if it comes. So back to insurance. So as you all know, students and faculty who are participating on faculty-led programs are required to have the GeoBlue system insurance. That's still going to be the case. It's still right around that same cost, about $1.45 a day. Then we usually build in about $5 for just incidentals, just in case. And with that, what GeoBlue covers is quite extensive. It is a health insurance, so it covers kind of physical health. They've got some new information or new resources for students for mental health that we're really excited about. They've partnered with, I forget the name of the organization, but they are able to provide virtual counseling now, which I know was something huge that folks were pushing for. So they will have access to that. So it's mostly physical and mental health, any type of pharmacy, doctor's visits, hospital stays, things like that. And of course, that would include related to COVID. It also covers medical and political evacuation. So again, political evacuation is something that is triggered by the U.S. Department of State. If there's political unrest or natural disaster, and the U.S. Department of State issues an order for citizens to be evacuated from the country, that's when it would trigger what we call our drum QSAC coverage, which is that evacuation insurance. And then they also have insurance that covers medical evacuation should it be determined that a student or faculty can't get the care they need in country. And that kind of leads into what it does not cover. And what it does not cover is evacuation related to the pandemic itself. So we did find this out this past semester. And again, it's all about when the U.S. Department of State triggers a U.S. evacuation. That's really what they're looking for in terms of their decision-making point. Up until then, that drum QSAC coverage doesn't kick in for groups. For individual medical evacuation, it would be more on a case-by-case basis if the local doctor had decided that the best course of action would be to repatriate the student or faculty back to the U.S. So because that's something that isn't covered, another consideration would be to look into cancel for any reason insurance. So GeoBlue does not at this point provide that, and there's not really a system-wide group opportunity to enroll in this coverage, but we were talking with other system schools, and NC State recommended Travel Insured International through CISI, which I forget what that stands for, but if you Google it, it will come up. And so that is cancel for any reason insurance, which means that if they miss a flight, if the trip is canceled, like any reason, then they would get some funding back. So I would definitely encourage you to look into that, and then your students to look into that. But that's not something that GeoBlue would cover. Yes, Carmen.
So am I understanding correctly that you are saying that the students will receive the GeoBlue insurance coverage? Mm-hmm. That will be part of the package that the students mm-hmm. receive.
Yes.
And IPC is also recommending that individually, if students or faculty obtain this additional travel insurance?
It's something we would recommend you look into. I don't think we have like an office-wide mandate or requirement for that, but it definitely is something that I would suggest looking into.
Okay, so my question will be, so mm-hmm. have you at IPC thought about not going with GeoBlue and going with this other? If this one would, in mm-hmm. this particular situation that we're
right.
living under, maybe mm-hmm. provide, you know, a larger coverage for everyone. Have you considered that?
And that is a great point. And we did actually go to the insurance provider for the system to try and get this as system mm-hmm. coverage. And by we, I mean mostly NC State and UNC were, I think, leading the charge on that one. And with this, because this particular coverage has so many overlaps with the GeoBlue, which is the preferred and indeed required insurance for the system, they weren't able to actually require it or to get a group rate. So that's why it's a separate thing. And actually the CISI coverage has a little bit of duplicate coverage. So if students or faculty were to engage in this program, you have to have the GeoBlue, and this would be a supplemental insurance that you'd pay for individually. And it does have some duplicate coverage, but I mean, for me, like my approach is the more the merrier in terms of insurance mm-hmm. coverage. But that's why we weren't able to get it at a system level or to like mandate it like we mandate the GeoBlue.
Right. Well, in case students and faculty would like to consider mm-hmm. this additional coverage, would you be able to provide us solid information about the rates, and so that we could share that information with the student, just to make sure that we are you know, giving the students the right information. Would you be able to do that?
So I can definitely share.
Some.
So I can definitely share the link to this particular website. And they have, I actually was going on it the other day to kind of try and look at the process.
Right.
And they do have an individualized quote system. So I think you would have to get a quote for every single person, but they do have a method to request quotes through their website. And I know they have 3 different levels of insurance, but only their highest level of insurance includes the cancel for any reason insurance.
Okay, so would you mention that when you send us this information, that we have to request the highest level of insurance? That would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, definitely will. All right, other questions on insurance? And just to say, I have a very limited view of who I can see, so that's why I keep calling on Carmen, because she's my first person in my window. But if anyone else has any questions. Okay. All right. So again, some kind of general recommendations from IPC as you approach your risk management planning for your program would be, again, to set those firm go, no-go dates. So that is setting a date that depends, again, on when your payments are due, when the students have submitted their payments, when the deadline for course registration is, just kind of all those different moving pieces to figure out when would be the best time for your program to decide, okay, we're going to move forward if conditions seem supportive at this juncture, or decide to cancel the program then. And again, that usually ends up being somewhere between mid-February and mid-March, varying according to the program. So you'll want to spend some time thinking with your co-directors, talking with your partners. Again, I'm happy to talk with any of you one-on-one to figure out what would be the best time for your program to set that date. And also letting students know about that date. Transparency and decision-making, I think, is another point a little bit further down, and that's something that is really important. And I know I'll try to share as much as I can with you as decisions are being made and procedures are being established. And then also with the students, making sure that they're kind of clear on what all is entailed and what the approach is that the faculty are taking as well. And then another encouragement I would extend to you would be to explore virtual options. I believe almost all of you, if not all of you, may have received an email or are going to in the next couple of days. Eastern Carolina University is hosting a really long list of workshops, virtual workshops on virtual exchange opportunities and virtual programming. So that's something that if it would make sense for your program, it might not be a bad idea to explore as a backup, or even I know the Belgian program that usually goes over spring break is actually going virtual this year. So we have someone right in our midst that is an expert on that. So definitely kind of looking at what the possibilities are should we get to that go date and something changes, or if we get closer and it seems like conditions won't support. So definitely take a look at that. And I've been adding more resources to that faculty-led Canvas page. And if you look in there, you should be able to see a few. Yes, I saw Carmen's hand again, yes.
Yes, that what you have mentioned about the virtual option, that trigger a question for you. Mm-hmm. Okay, we, in the program that Alex and I will be co-directing this coming summer, we are teaching classes. We are teaching on site, minimally five different courses.
Right.
So one of the things that we were able to do this past summer was to provide the students arrangements so that they will not run into the issue that you mentioned of graduating students who were planning to complete the required courses while in the program and so forth. Now, but we ran into an issue that has to do with funding, because these courses, although they are taught during the summer, They are not really, I don't know how this relationship with the summer unit works, but the fact is that if the program doesn't go, the courses cannot go without finding an arrangement with summer school. And that can be difficult because they also have funding concerns. And I think it will be really interesting to explore what possibilities might be there that if we are entertaining that some students would complete their programming study while studying abroad, that somehow arrangements can be made so that if the program cannot take place inside, that at least the students can be raised for those summer courses. And I don't know if this is something that you guys might have already spoken about with teaching, summer teaching, but I think it's an important issue because it does create some problem. Not to mention that it also affects the faculty.
Right.
Because we are reserving our teaching to be teaching during the summer, and it's also you know, a professional and a financial blow to the faculty that might be suddenly not be without a summer teaching assignment because the programs are canceled. So I think that would be something that we would really like for you to explore.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that feedback.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll definitely check into what impact that might have with UNCG online courses, because I know with the way that we typically run our summer faculty-led courses, they are standalone. They don't accrue tuition or FTEs. So that gives us a little more flexibility. But again, asking that important question of what happens if it switches to virtual, does it remain in that model, or does it need to also shift in how it's loaded and coded?
Right. And what will be the funding for those courses?
Yes.
Yeah. So that they don't have to be completely canceled.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm taking notes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Yes, so I'm going to look into that, and again, transparency and decision making is something I want to kind of commit to, so I will definitely look at those as well. And then another thing is to read the terms closely. If you're working with contracts, of course, IPC is the one that can help facilitate contracts through the review and signature process, and that happens at the level of the provost. So making sure that your department or you personally are not signing those documents, but we can help you push them up to the provost, which is where they need to go for that signature. But just making sure you're reading the terms closely, know what your refund policies are, when your program fees are due, and making sure that you're being really clear with that, with what your expectations are, so that you don't run across surprises later in the process. And then again, transparency is really important. So being transparent with students about kind of what your decision-making process is, what all IPC is doing, and then with those go, no-go dates as well. All right, and then I was just going to touch on some general information just to kind of give you some overall risk management strategies that you can use in addition to all of these COVID-specific ones. So just talking a little about responsibilities, kind of what faculty directors are responsible for and what IPC is here to help you with. So for faculty directors, of course, providing assessments, reviews, safety reports with your application, your renewal application to IPC, and if there are any extreme updates, like making sure that we're aware of those as well is helpful. Reading the program director handbooks and attending trainings like this one, and I will be creating probably a number of other trainings throughout the year just to keep y'all up to speed on risk management, and then some other topics like marketing and virtual opportunities. And I know in the past we've done financial and all sorts of things. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Submitting the pre-departure report no later than 1 month prior to leaving. So that's going to be just kind of a check-in just to say, hey, if there's anything that is new of concern since you filed your initial risk management report with your application, having a heads up in writing is nice. If nothing has changed, we don't need to really worry about that because I'll check in with you, just kind of generally anyways. Communicating with IPC if any incident, including violations of law or university policy, occur during the program. And then of course, coming back to debrief with IPC upon the program completion and submitting any relevant incident documentation. And again, that's a really important part of risk management is kind of, so you plan, you implement, and then you come back and you evaluate how you handled the crisis or the risk management piece, and then making adjustments as necessary. So we're here to help you with that. Then IPC, we're of course always monitoring the risks, State Department, CDC. We are, I think all of us on a listserv for the Overseas Security Advisory Council, which has a lot of really good information. We have kind of our ear to the ground on that as well. So we'll make sure that we let you know if there are any important updates or risks that you should be aware of that maybe might be outside of the radar or lower, like might be outside of your radar. And then offer orientations and training sessions to you and then also to your students to help you all minimize risk and respond appropriately to emergencies. That was just the Program Director Handbook. 10.1 is where you'll find that information. And as you're thinking and building your risk assessment, these are just some good essential elements to keep in mind. So making sure that you're gathering those resources, looking at contact information for U.S. embassies, hospitals, English-speaking doctors, that information is available through GeoBlue. Looking at local police, listing of airports, train stations, alternate accommodations, potentially, things like that. So just making sure you're gathering those information together. And then evaluating those likely risks. Again, that kind of upper left-hand quadrant where it's high likelihood, low severity, then you're going to want to look at those and see what the risks are in your program location. Again, State Department, within those travel advisories, they will break it out into what type of activity they are listing the travel advisory about. If there's increased crime or health risks, they'll lay those out. And then CDC is another really great resource, the World Health Organization, GeoBlue. In your Program Director Handbook, there should be a generic login for GeoBlue. That's only for faculty, don't share that with students, but you can log in using that information and actually see, GeoBlue has these destination dashboards, which are pretty spiffy if I do say so myself. And those will tell you information about like water quality, traffic, risk, health risk, things like that. And they'll give you a really good overview of health and safety risks at your location. Identifying alternative methods of transportation or housing. I know in the sheet that I had shared with you all before this meeting, the guiding questions, one of the questions is kind of figuring out transportation. Do you need a bigger bus to allow for social distancing? Are you planning on using public transit? Will public transit be available? Has it shifted at all kind of in the COVID era? And then also thinking about housing, not only for students kind of throughout the program, but also thinking about housing should a student need to quarantine. What will that look like? What might be the possibilities there? Having a communication plan for how to reach out in emergencies. So that not only is between like you and your co-director, knowing how you're going to get in contact, knowing and telling your students how they can get in contact with you, having a meeting place that you would come if there were to be an emergency, having a central meeting place, and then also how you would communicate with IPC. And we can definitely help you kind of communicate on the state side should there be an emergency that needs that. Having copies of important documents in several places. Of course, we'll collect the student information and share that with you, usually via box, but I would definitely recommend having printed copies of that as well and having them in several places. So that way, if your luggage gets lost, then you have another way to access those documents. Have a plan for how to access funds in an emergency, not relying all on cash, all on credit, not putting all your eggs in one basket, making sure you have several ways to access funds should an emergency arise. And then thinking through who will lead the trip if you cannot. This is one of the reasons that we do recommend having at least 2 program directors, so that if one of you is sick, or if one of you, I don't know, has a sprained ankle and can't go walking around the city that day, knowing kind of how that will play out is very important. And this also relates to those of you working with providers or working with local institutions, just making sure that you know who your contact is and kind of have a plan of action should something come up. And also, again, stay calm. I know that's kind of some interesting advice to hear in this time of COVID, but just making sure that you know that you're going to be the model of how students react to emergencies. So really modeling how you want students to react in any given situation. All right, so now I'm going to open it back up to discussion. Let's check our time here. All right, so what other questions do y'all have? Yes, Hope? I think you're still muted.
Thanks. I hope this doesn't sound too amorphous, but if I understand right, you want us to revise and update our risk management plans.
Oh, for those of you that have already submitted?
Well, we've submitted ours, last spring, but.
Right. It might be worth a revisit, just because I know that y'all submitted back in March. Yes, I can send you a copy. Do you have a copy, or do you want me to send
I think we have it.
Okay.
No, my other questions had to do with things are so fluid right now.
Yes.
You want it, I mean, ours would have to be, well, presuming this happens and that happens and that happens in the next few months, we'll go. For instance, Britain has a 2-week quarantine for entering passengers, and it's a real quarantine. You can't go there.
Right.
To me, that, I mean, the students can't afford to live 2 more weeks in London just sitting in.
Yeah.
So that would close. We have been assuming and hoping and praying that it will all go away, or at least that will, they'll come up with something else, such as, quick test at the airport they're talking about. But I mean, there's so much that we can't put in the risk or management, or we can just say, if this happens and that happens. I don't know if that's a question. We can make it provisional. We can say best case scenario, this and this and that.
Yeah.
We know they have rules for the tube, for instance, and I presume they will. But
yeah, so with that, kind of like what you just said about scenarios, maybe coming up with a couple of different scenarios and what decision making might be there. That might be a larger conversation to have, just to think, because everything is so fluid. It's still 8 months away, 9 months away.
For us, it
can happen, So I would just kind of approach it as best you can right now, and then we'll keep checking in as we get closer to whatever your go no go date is, as to see how much it shifts and whether or not it shifts in a way that seems supportive or a way that seems like it might be better to extend the program offerings.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I assumed, but that's, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Seeing something in the chat.
Yes,
Okay.
Carmen.
All right. Hi, Carmen. Yes.
Yes. Will you be able to give us some really specific wording that you want us to include in our flyers? I was just this morning reviewing my flyer from summer 2020, and there is the regular information that we had about refunds and dates when the students have to be turning in their funds and so forth. So I'm thinking that we might need to revisit all of those deadlines and so forth. So would you like me to send you what I have now and we can chat about it, and you can let me know? But I know that there is some language that would probably have to be changed, even including there is a language in the flyer about coming in person to IPC to make payments. You know, lots of these little details.
Right.
We need to probably figure out how to do it now.
Yeah, so you can send me what you have for right now, and I'll take a look at it, and we'll see kind of what we can tweak. The most important thing to include in everything, and this has been true forever, but it's especially true now, is that IPC disclaimer that we reserve the right to cancel or alter based on conditions beyond our control. And I don't think there is a condition much more beyond our control than COVID. So
exactly. Okay, I will be sending information.
Yeah, but I'll take a look and see if there's any additional specific wording that we might want to
that you might want to also share with other faculty members, so that, you know, we all have the same wording, you know, in advance of whatever might happen. Because I was saying the situation is very fluid right now.
Yes. Yeah, I know. And this is one of the things we always talk to our students about, developing that comfort with uncertainty and that flexibility. And I think right now we're really getting a lot of practice with that. Yeah. Other questions?
Heidi, I was just going to add one thing. Just thinking back to the passports, I think it's really important to make sure that your students, from the, I guess, the earliest that you're communicating with them, that they're applying, because I think there might be a tendency for them to maybe read some of these, like, you know, we've got a super long list of things that people need to consider if they're thinking about going abroad in the spring, and it's really overwhelming. And I could see a student thinking like, wow, look at all those conditions or all those things that have to be overcome for this to work. And they might think like, well, I'm not going to buy my passport now because there's so much that's up in the air. But then the passport, it's, like Heidi was saying, it's a huge backlog. We've got students that were thinking about going abroad in the spring, and they've told us that they don't have passports, and we're pretty close to saying it's not going to happen, just because of everything that we're reading. So I would just hate for someone to kind of sit on it and then think, okay, it looks like it's going to go. Now it's April and I'm going to apply for my passport, and forget it.
Right. Yes, Carol?
Oh, yeah, Tom, that's a very good point. Thank you for reminding us. And you know, I guess when we talk to the students, we have to let them know that this is kind of an expense that they will have to assume, and that it's not recoverable, right? That's.
But hopefully they'll go abroad sometime. You know, if it doesn't work,
sometime in the next 10 years. So
you know, lost expense.
But yes, thank you. We need to mention that, definitely. Yes.
Okay. Other questions? I guess, Audrey, can I call you out a little here since you're the risk management expert? Is there anything that I missed or additional things that you would recommend from your experience?
I think you did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Audrey is leading a program about crisis management in the Caribbean this summer. So definitely good to have an expert amongst our faculty directors. All right, any other questions? And I know I shared that list of guiding questions with you if you have any questions about that or want to follow up. I know that was a pretty extensive list, again, based a lot on the article from Beyond Summer 2020 that I had mentioned. And I will be also adding kind of these resources to the program Canvas page as well. All right. Yes.
So Heidi, all of the information that we need to turn in, all the paperwork, it's available in your webpage, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes, there is the applications, the budgets. If you need me to share previous copies of your renewal, just shoot me an email and I can. Okay, perfect.
I have it.
Yeah.
Okay, so just look for the 2021 in there.
Yes, and there should be just a section that says like renewal application and renewal forms, and it's all in that location.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Well, I think that was everything I could think of at this point in time. I'm sure definitely things will keep evolving as we move towards summer 2021. We're really hopeful that programs will be able to go forward again. Definitely keeping an eye on all these conditions, but do know that IPC is here to support you however we can as we move through this process. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to any of our staff. We'd be more than happy to help you think through some of these things. And then I did, oh, one more thing I wanted to mention. I did have a list of resources that are at the end of the slideshow. And one thing that I did want to point out to you that actually, I think it was Logan in our office put on our radar, literally, was the IATA Travel Center, which is actually a website where you can see in real time the flight restrictions into and out of different countries. You choose your country of origin, your country of destination, and you can see kind of what their guidelines are at a glance. It's really helpful. It makes you prove you're not a robot every time you go into the website, but it's definitely worth it. So definitely check that out. All right, and I guess that's it for me. So hopefully we'll be able to say bon voyage soon and actually be going somewhere other than just to the kitchen. I hope that y'all are staying safe and healthy and that your semesters go smoothly.
Thank you,
All right,
Heidi.
wonderful. Thank you so much. And remember the renewal deadline is October 1st. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Bye. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Mm.